This Prezi will explain to you some background information about Beowulf. It's just some brief background information that'll kind of help as you're reading, help you to understand some of the key things that I think you should be looking for, and also a little bit of some things that might help you along the way. Beowulf, here we go. Are you ready? I can almost feel the excitement radiating off of you through the World Wide Web. Okay, so first things first, origins of the text. Well, we don't know. We know, we can guess that we know it's oral. We know that it came orally during that time that I was telling you about in the previous lecture, that it came during the tribal kind of, pre the Norman invasion, multicultural things where the Scots were delivering this tale. But when we talk about our version that we have of Beowulf, that is, we have the Beowulf Codex that is at the British Library. We talk about the writing of the manuscript. We are actually still arguing about this, and we will actually argue about this in our paper. So more on this later. And if you are not at in any way interested about the origin of the text, don't worry. If the information I present to you is not absolutely fascinating to you, there'll be some wiggle room to kind of make it your own a little bit and take it in a little different direction if you want. But more on the paper later. I just do like you to kind of keep that in mind. And so these things are in question. And I think it's important for you guys to know that there aren't always black and white answers for things. And when we talk about the study of literature, when we talk about the study of history, we're we're piecing together the puzzle of human experience, and it can be messy. And that can also be really interesting because you can add in what you think your ideas about it. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't some cold hard facts about things that happen, like a battle, like a great battle where someone conquers it. That's a cold hard fact. But there are some things about culture that can be a little tricky. We'll talk about that this semester. So this is in your book too, and I would suggest maybe, if you like Googled this and printed it off or something, I think it's really helpful to have this on a piece of paper while you're reading instead of having to flip back and forth so you can see who these people are, because these are Norse names and I mean, let's face it, they're kind of weird. And so in order to remember them, it might be more difficult because they're not, it's not John and Jane, which might be easier to remember. One thing I can suggest, and one trick that I learned, is getting a magazine and cutting out faces of celebrities and then putting them on popsicle sticks and raising them up each time someone talks as you're reading. And that sometimes helps you get a mental image of what they might look like if you're having trouble visualizing. It might help you memorize the names, especially because some of them are very similar. Wealhtheow is different, but then you have Hrothgar, Rogar, Alga, Halfdane, Rothmund, Rhetoric. They all start to kind of sound like a sneeze. Okay, so it might help. That might be something to help you do that. The daughter of Igalac, who was given to Eofor, may have been born to him by a former wife other than Igid. I mean, I am not in any way, shape, or form expecting you to um, memorize the genealogy of the people of Beowulf, but I do think it helps when you're trying to keep straight. Okay, wait, is that his son? Is this his dad? To kind of have that in front of you, and then you can make your little notes on it as you're reading. So the Geats. The Geats are important in Beowulf, and the image below shows three important gods to the Geats. You have Frigg on the left with sword and bow. You have Thor in the middle with crown and spire on the throne, and Odin on the right, heavily armed. This was published in 1555 in the History de Gentibus. I'm not even going to try to read that, by Olus Magnus. So this is just a representation of the gods that were important to the Geats. Okay, so Beowulf's role in society. Will be important to remember, and I want you to think about this as you're reading the changes and the roles that Beowulf takes on within the tribal social system. He begins among the Geats as a strong fighter of marginal status as nephew of Iglac. Then later he is adopted with great honor into Hrothgar's household, and finally he becomes ruler of the Geats when Iglac dies without a male heir. It is extremely important to know this because the relationship of the king and warrior is reciprocal. The warrior provides service while his lord offers protection and distributes wealth, often in the form of armbands and neckworks. And it's important to see that they do work together, because sometimes we think of the king is just like supreme ruler, and you can blame this on Louis in France because he came up with absolutism monarchy. But we see them as supreme ruler, and they just kind of tell people what to do. But we're talking about in this society, they really are all warriors, and they're all working together to protect the common good. And so it is important for the king to make sure that make sure that he is helping to split the booty, split the treasure, because it's important to do that. Another thing that's important in Beowulf's society is Heorot. Heorot is the Great Hall, and the Great Hall is extremely an important element to remember. It's important to remember the name, his Heorot. It's very important to remember that, as like for a quiz kind of thing. And this is a mead hall, and mead is like a fermented wine, beer kind of thing. Um, it's a honey, it's fermented honey, and if you ever go to the Renaissance Festival in Charlotte and you're over 21, you could taste some of it. I think it's really way too sweet for me. But the mead hall is a great place of a communal gathering and feasting place. And all people of society would go there, and that is where you would kind of show off, you know, what your status was, and that is where the king would distribute the wealth. That is where people would swear their allegiances to, and that's where fights would get started as well. So it's an important function of the society. It's that place that they all meet for entertainment. Um, it is like the Walmart of the Middle Ages. Just kidding. I've never sworn an oath of loyalty in Walmart, but I maybe have gotten, a golden ring there or something. Probably not real gold. Um, at any rate, this is just a place that was really important to the community. It's almost like a community center, and it is at the center of the community, and it's where people would go to solve problems and to swear their loyalty to the king. And it's also where the Scops are going to be singing or delivering these tales and these genealogies. And that's one thing you'll notice in the book, and what's kind of confusing. And I say don't get hung up on it. Go more for the plot than getting hung up on it. Whenever they tell a story, especially in the beginning, they will like list who their mama's, daddy's, grandma's, grandpa's, cousin's, aunt's uncle is. He will be like, I am Beowulf, king of the Geats, blah, 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 son of Higelac, son of Hrothgar. They're doing that because that would have been very important in that time period, so that you knew where allegiances lied. Because when you're talking about a tribal community, you have to know who they're from, where their allegiances lie, and they could be life or death if you're from the wrong people. So that can sometimes be confusing, I think, when people are reading the text. So don't get too hung up on that. I'm not going to try to trip you up. I'm not going to be like, who's Beowulf's dad? It's more important that you know what Beowulf's dad did, or, what Beowulf did, than remember, his entire genealogy. So here are some elements. Beowulf is an epic, and here are some elements of epic writing, particularly when it comes to Beowulf. Length, it's long. Content, it's both historical and mythical. So there's some sort of supernatural in there, as well as a retelling of a history, even if it's a falsified history. But there is something culturally that is historically accurate. There's some sort of divine intervention, that the things are left up to the fates. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Christian god. I mean, when you think of Greek epics, it's their pantheon of gods that intervene. The hero always has some sort of flaw and ultimate weakness. They might be great at everything, but there is always one weakness in the hero. Orality and performance, there are certain ways that it can be told orally and performed. And also writing is important as well. And finally, language is usually in the language of everyday people, but it's ornate and poetic. So, 3 things you should look for while you're reading. There are breath pauses and mnemonic devices, and those would have been used by the Scops. A mnemonic device is something that helps you remember something. Remember when you were a kid and you learned about the colors of the rainbow? Maybe you did learn Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. That's a mnemonic device. It's a way to help you remember the colors of the rainbow. Or I think we learned something to learn the planets in the solar system, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something about pizza. My very educated mother served us 9 pizzas, but it wouldn't be pizzas now because Pluto's not a planet. At any rate, I'll quit waxing poetic. You don't care about that. You want to hear about Beowulf. So there are places, if you notice, especially if you tried to read it around, where there would have been pauses for breath and for effect, and also some mnemonic devices that would help them remember it. Kenning is something that is from the Middle Ages, and you'll notice this, and I think it's kind of a cool way to write, and I've always been interested in that. For instance, the whale road. You'll see, like, when they talk about whale road, they're talking about the ocean. That's another way of saying the ocean. I like to think of it as like, I like to think of it as like when I think of like rap music or something like in pop culture like that. The way in which they use a word that's got 2 parts that's a descriptor instead of actually just saying that thing. So you'll see that ring giver is another example of kenning, and they're talking about someone that is that's the king, is the ring giver. He gives the jewelry out. Okay, but you'll see different instances of kenning. And going back to that idea of ring giver, naming conventions are in there too. And what I mean by that is that when they're referencing someone who's important, they might call him the ring giver. The king is the ring giver, or someone who is a great warrior, doom giver, doom bringer, or something like that. So there are conventions of naming that can help you remember who some of the people are as well. Here are some things I think that you might, if you're really lost as to what to consider while you're reading, here are 5 things that I think you should consider while you read. How does the significance of treasure change as the poem progresses? What does it mean to say there are monsters? What does architecture represent in the poem? How does kenning affect the poem? And what are the tensions between the pagan warrior people and the suggested Christianity of the poet? These are 5 questions to keep in mind. Don't worry about particularly answering them, but just kind of keep them in mind. And these are 5 questions that I'll be kind of guiding us to answer in the coming, in our study of Beowulf as we continue the study this week. So, why do I need to learn all of this? Why would I make you read Beowulf? Why is it important for you to take a course and learn this information if you're not going to be a Middle Ages scholar? There are a few different reasons that I want you to consider. Understanding the human experience, understanding how people think and react, understanding the origins of the language of English. Where does that come from? How does that work? Understanding a scholarly conversation, how scholars break down and analyze these arguments and look at the different ways in which we understand, the origins of our language and where things come from. I'm going to teach you some research processes along the way in this study so that you learn how to research scholarly material and read stuff that's difficult. I mean, Beowulf's a difficult poem to read. Being able to read something difficult is definitely going to help you improve your reading skills because practice makes perfect. We're going to look at improving your analytical skills by being able to look at some details of how of something that is difficult. And finally, we're going to improve your composition skills with the major assignment.